Welcome to the Max Future Weekly Podcast. All Apple talk and no chit chat.
Okay, this is Lex at maxfutures.com, and this is the Apple Podcast, episode 114, May 12th, 2012. I missed it last week. Sorry about that. Had sort of things going on, but I did get the iPad podcast out. You can also check that out. And so we'll cover a lot of Apple news, and there's a lot to cover. So remember, this is a chit-chat-free podcast all about Apple, Apple-related news, Apple-related stuff. So let's get to it. Okay, so one of the more exciting things in terms of news is that there's already leaks that Apple will release a new version of the operating system for the iOS devices. This would be version iOS 6. And there's leaks about what's going to be in iOS 6. Now, iOS 6 is the operating system for the iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touch. And it says here on MacRumors.com, reporting on something that 9to5Mac reported, that Apple is going to change the default mapping service in the iOS from Google to their own mapping service. Now, as you know, like a lot of apps use Google Maps, and Google Maps is an app on the iPhone, the iPad, and the iPod Touch. And Apple is, no longer really good friends with Google, so it's not surprising that they might be going to their own mapping service. And it says here that, a while ago, Apple purchased mapping companies Placebase and Poly9. And it says here that the acquisitions are ready to bear fruit. And it says, with last year's purchase of 3D mapping firm C3 Technologies. So this is pretty cool. It says here the most important aspect of the new Maps application, I guess quoting 9to5Mac, is a powerful new 3D mode. The 3D mode does not come enabled by default, but users simply need to click a 3D button that is conveniently and visibly stored in the app. And it says, perhaps under the fold, like the current traffic pin and map view buttons, this 3D mode is said to essentially be technology straight from C3 Technologies. Beautiful, realistic graphics based on declassified missile target algorithms. Interesting. It goes on to say in the article, Apple's in-house mapping service will otherwise be rather similar in appearance to the current Google Maps application, although Apple's implementation is said to be a much cleaner, faster, and more reliable experience, and will include new icon based on the same viewing of the company's Infinite Loop headquarters in Cupertino, but with new colors and styling. Now, they also have an update there from the website All Things Digital that says it has been that the claim has been independently confirmed. All Things Digital, according to MacRumors, says, we've independently confirmed this is indeed the case. Sources describe the new map apps as a forthcoming tentpole feature of iOS that will, in the words of one, quote, blow your head off, end quote. I'm not sure what that means, and the source in question declined to elaborate, but it's likely a reference to the photorealistic 3D mapping technology Apple acquired when it purchased C3 Technologies. Now, I think this is great. I mean, I've always wondered what's Apple going to do in terms of its old partnership with Google. Now, if you recall, Apple and Google used to be really good friends a long time ago. When the iPhone first came out, it featured a lot of, you couldn't buy apps on the iPhone or the iPad. There was no iPad, actually, when the iPhone came out in 2007. And you couldn't buy apps. And it came with some default apps. And the default apps included YouTube and Google, a search built into the Safari browser, and Google Maps. And then, of course, Steve Jobs and the leadership of Apple felt completely betrayed by Google. Google executives like Eric Schmidt were on Apple's board, and they went out and created a competitor to Apple by releasing the Android operating system, which is, Apple claims is a ripoff of iOS and the look and feel of the iPhone. So I always wondered, like, what's Apple going to do? Because, Apple has this Google technology in the iPhone and the iPad. Isn't it risky for Apple to, on one hand, be in competition with Google, on the other hand, be vulnerable? What if, like, Google pulled the Maps app, or what if Google started charging a lot of money to Apple to use the Maps app? So this makes totally good sense for Apple from a business point of view. And if they can come out with a better mapping service than what Google has, it's going to be really good for Apple, because it'll distinguish Apple further from Android devices. Apple has its own voice recognition technology of Siri in the iPhone 4S, and some people say it's better than the voice recognition technology that Google has in the Android phones. And if Apple can come up with a mapping service and that's much better than what Google has, then that's also going to be a differentiator. So it's really kind of interesting how the lines are blurring. Google is more and more in competition with Apple. Google bought Motorola. That deal hasn't closed. But if Google actually starts making hardware for phones, then it's going to be really in direct competition with Apple, not just providing an operating system, but providing the hardware. So I think there's an arms race going on where Apple sees itself as a competitor with Google and other, online or software companies, like, for example, with Microsoft or with Amazon with the Kindle. So this is good for us because it's basically pushing Apple to innovate. And this map feature in iOS 6 sounds great. And apparently there's going to be the ability for developers to incorporate this in any program or app they make for the iOS devices. So I'm very excited by this. And I think we're all going to benefit from this. Now, MG Siegler, who was a tech columnist and I guess still posts for TechCrunch, is pretty hooked into Apple himself, MG Siegler, and he also sort of jumped in on discussing what could be the next version of iOS 6. From his sources, he's heard that iOS 6 code name is Sundance. Now, he had a picture of Sundance from the Butch Cassidy, movie, Butch Cassidy movie. But apparently Apple has historically given codes to its different software and operating systems based on ski resorts. And Sundance is a famous ski resort in Utah. And actually there's the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, but there is an actual Sundance ski resort. So MG Siegler has some interesting comments on it. He does say that there is going to be this Apple Map 3D thing going on in iOS 6. And he basically says, look, this is a real threat to Google. And he points out, like, Google recently started charging for its map service. But if Apple's mapping service takes off for developers and a lot of third-party developers for the iOS devices start using Apple's map, it's going to significantly weaken Google Maps, and so maybe Google will be forced then to offer its maps for free again, because what Google did is it made its maps for free, and now it started saying it's going to start charging high volume customers of Google for Google Maps API. So he, MG Siegler definitely confirms that this map function is going to be in there. He also basically heard or believes that there'll be Siri APIs in iOS 6. And what does Siri APIs mean? Well, right now Siri is the voice recognition function in iPhone 4S, and there's two aspects of it. One is there's a microphone in the keyboard, and wherever you can type something, you can dictate something. But the thing that's exclusive to iPhone 4S is the ability to hold the home button down. It launches Siri, which is sort of like a artificial intelligence robot talking to you, and you can ask natural language questions to Siri, and Siri either will verbally answer or will type something out or bring you to a web page that has the answer. And it's really cool. I mean, Siri only works well when you have a decent hookup to the internet. If your iPhone 4S doesn't have a decent hookup, it doesn't work well. But what MG Siegler is talking about is Apple releasing Siri APIs. Now, what an API is basically a tool that a company like Apple or somebody who has an operating system provides so that developers can take advantage of some aspect of the Apple program. So right now, Siri, developers can't hook in their app to work with Siri unless you, for example, jailbreak your iPhone or iPad or your iPhone. Then you might be able to get some tools through the jailbreak community to have Siri work with other apps. Like, for example, I jailbroke my iPhone 4S, and I have some jailbreak tool that allows Siri to launch apps. And Apple doesn't have Siri launching apps, but you could have, with APIs, you could do all sorts of crazy things. So, for example, what if Siri worked with GarageBand? You could basically give verbal instructions to GarageBand. Like you could record something, play some music, and then say, Siri, stop GarageBand. And that would just stop the GarageBand without recording, let's say, your voice. Or Siri, rewind GarageBand, and GarageBand would rewind. So voice control would be great because let's say you're a musician using GarageBand, you might be away from the iPad or the iPhone. I mean, there's other great things that a Siri API could do. You could, let's think of an app. Well, pretty much any app. What if like you were doing a drawing app and you said, okay, Siri, please email this, this picture I drew to, so-and-so, to Billy, So this is going to be kind of huge, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think Apple's going to have a lot of cool new features in iOS 6. And so when is that going to come out? I think developers are going to get a preview of this on June 11th. That's the first day of WWDC, Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference that takes place in San Francisco. It's a week-long conference. And every year there's a keynote address. In the past, it's always been by Steve Jobs, or generally been him when he wasn't sick. And so I think you're going to see Scott Forstall, who's a high-up executive really in charge of the iOS platform. I think he's going to be doing a big part of the presentation. And I think we're going to see a lot of cool features. Now, other leaks regarding what could be in iOS have come out too. And one thing is some update to the iCloud functionality. And Mac Stories had a story that basically there's going to be reminders and notes web apps in iCloud. I mean, right now, what do you have? You have Find My iPhone. If you got iWork sort of integrated with it, and plus email. But according to Mac Stories, some people have discovered that there's going to be sort of an update, a beta update to iCloud, which would mean that developers get to use it first. So it says here a few minutes ago, and this story came out on May 11th, which is yesterday. It says a few minutes ago, developer Stephen Troughton Smith tweeted a photo showing a beta login page for iCloud.com. Goes on to say Apple's suite of applications to access iCloud services like Mail and Calendar. The photo showed Apple's icon-based navigation for iCloud.com with the addition of reminders and notes icons in what appears to be an internal version of iCloud.com carrying future features. And it goes on to say that the login page clearly states the beta version of iCloud.com is available to developers running the latest version of iOS X and iOS. And it says, available at beta.icloud.com. I managed to grab a screenshot before Apple quickly pulled the website and started redirecting it to iCloud's public website. The beta page showed a testing environment, and I was able to see the notes icon in the background. And it goes, so Apple pulled it, and it says here, it appears Apple also has been testing website available at developer.icloud.com, which has started redirecting to the company's public iCloud product website as well. And it says here in the updates, number 3, interestingly enough, other code strings from developer.icloud.com point to a new developer icon on Apple servers. Currently, Apple offers a developer portal for iCloud at developer.apple.com/iCloud with links to downloads and documentation. And it says, as several developers have wished for Apple to provide more debugging tools for iCloud-enabled apps, however, it wouldn't be a surprise to see new web-based tools for iCloud being unveiled at WWDC. And it says here that the code suggests a beta of iOS 6 will be necessary to use the new web apps. So, it only costs $99 to sign up to be an iOS developer, and then you get access to this sort of stuff. So it's pretty cool. So I think we're going to see really interesting upgrades to iOS 6. I mean, one thing that I would like is a feature that Microsoft has with its Windows 8 or whatever for the smartphones or tablets, and Microsoft is going to allow developers programs or apps to allow themselves to talk directly to other apps. Right now, Apple's plan is to sandbox apps that are on the iPhone and the iPad, so they really can't talk to each other. But the implications are huge, because if you could make it easy for programs to talk to each other, you could easily share information between apps. Like, you could make your picture apps in the picture app program to maybe work with GarageBand, like if you want to bring some images to match and be part of your music. So I think that's a feature that I'd like to get, and I'm sure there's a lot of features everybody would like to get, and hopefully we'll see these features in iOS 6. Well, it looks like we could also have a new toy to play with from Apple. It's starting to look like there maybe really be a Apple TV coming down the pipe this year. Now, you know that Foxconn is the big Taiwanese-based manufacturer that makes a lot of Apple's products like the iPhone and the iPad on mainland China. And apparently this week, the chairman of the chief of Foxconn, somebody named Terry Gu, was speaking and sort of hinted or pretty much confirmed that they're working on or preparing to work on, making the Apple TV for Apple. The headline is in something called ChinaDaily.com.cn. It says Foxconn plans renewed shift into distribution. And it says here that in the bottom of the article, Gu admitted that, it's talking about the main production, but at the end it says, Gu said Foxconn is making preparations for iTV, Apple Inc.'s rumored upcoming high-definition television, although development or manufacturing has yet to begin. iTV reportedly features an Illumin construction, Siri, and FaceTime video calling. So it says here, Foxconn's 50/50 venture factory with Sharp in Japan is one of the preparations made for the new device, Gu added. So it sounds like Foxconn is publicly saying they're involved in the preparation of manufacturing of the Apple TV, which makes it sound like that definitely an Apple TV is coming. And, I think Apple should come out with such an Apple TV, if it's... I've been writing about this for a long time. I think several years ago I said Apple should make an Apple TV. They, they can have a range of sizes, let's say from 42 inches to 60 inches. I would start the 42-inch Apple TV at $1,000. I think there'll be a market for a highly stylized TV with features that, like Siri or FaceTime, and an elegance that only Apple can bring. And if they can price the introductory model at $1,000, I think a lot of people will pay the $1,000. I'm willing to pay a premium for a 42-inch TV if it has great functionality and is well designed. So very cool that the chairman of Foxconn confirmed that. Here's an interesting story from Forbes, and it really goes to show you how important the iPhone, iPad is to other companies, particularly companies trying to get Apple's business. And Forbes has an article that says that Intel to build chips Apple, quote, can't ignore, end quote, for iPad, iPhone, CEO says. So apparently Intel, you know, the big chip maker out of Santa Clara, California, well, I guess they were talking to investors, and the chairman, basically, Paul Ottinelli, said, our job is to ensure our silicon is so compelling in terms of running the Mac better or being a better iPad device that as they make those decisions, they can't ignore us. So here's the problem for Intel. Intel has long been dominant in making chips, and that's been in the PC market. So Apple used Intel chips uses them in the iMac. And of course, the companies that make Windows-based computers use Intel. But the problem is in the smartphone market, Intel has been lacking. And instead, ARM-based designs are the chips that a lot of smartphone makers are using because frankly, they're more efficient and take up less power and don't get as hot. And Intel has been weak in sort of miniaturizing chips so that they run well on mobile devices. But who knows? Intel now really has a huge incentive because the iPhone and the iPad market is massive, and Intel is losing out on growth by not having chips that are very compatible. It says here in the Forbes article, while Intel may be an underdog in smartphone processors, Herman Ewell, who manages Intel's mobile and communication group with Mike Bell, argued that Intel is already an incumbent in the broader wireless semiconductor business, particularly in radio frequency chips. And it goes on to say, since Intel closed its acquisition of German semiconductor manufacturer Infineon's wireless assets, Intel has shipped 500 million wireless chipsets. Well, that's all good for Intel that they've got little wireless chips, but they're not shipping a lot of processor chips for the smartphones. It says here, though, Intel could make a comeback. It says Intel's secret weapon is a massive core of software engineers. Intel is the second largest contributor to the open source Linux operating system. It's using that expertise to help tune mobile software for its chips. It had 1,200 engineers helping Google with its Android mobile operating system. It also helped Apple manage its shift from PowerPC processors to Intel's processors for the Mac. It goes on to say there can be I think this is there's a lot of typos in this article. It says there can be no doubt Intel would be happy to help Apple make a similar shift in its smartphone and tablet business. Who wrote this article? It's got someone named Brian Caulfield. It's got a lot of typos. Well, this is good for Apple. I mean, it's so powerful and so big that suppliers are just clamoring to get business from Apple, which will only spur on further innovation. So it's good to hear. Now, in recent weeks, additional information has come out on Steve Jobs, and stuff from his past has been sort of revealed. One of the more fun things is a couple of videos have come out. One basically came out a video of Apple's Steve Jobs acting as President Franklin Roosevelt that I guess he did back in the 80s as like a parody video. And it shows that Steve Jobs clearly was a prankster, had a sense of humor, and he was wildly successful in the 1980s, right? I mean, he was at the top of his early career at Apple, a multi-millionaire, yet he still, played games. And then another video came out where apparently some Apple employees and Steve Jobs had a cameo in the video. did a parody of the famous comedy film Ghostbusters. And the parody was that instead of busting ghosts, like in the movie Ghostbusters, that they busted IBM. So the movie was called Blue Busters. Big Blue was the nickname for IBM. And so I saw the video, and it was very, cute. It was very sort of 80s. It had an 80s feel for it, and an 80s technology in terms of making the video, and it had the music, like Who You Gonna Call, Blue Busters. So, but the point is, the guy who put it out says that on the Bloomberg site, it says there's been a lot of almost criticism of Steve Jobs recently about what a harsh taskmaster he was. Elliott said, this is a guy named Craig Elliott, but he says, but he had a fun side too. He liked to participate in things like this, which is this Blues Busters movie. So I think it's great. I mean, look, anybody who's going to have the wild success and run a company like Apple and build a company like Apple and be innovative is not going to suffer fools lightly. And, he was a passionate guy. So the impression I get of Steve Jobs is that when he was mad, he was really mad. And when he was excited, he was really excited. And when he was happy with his employees and proud of what he does, he was probably very effusive. So, people just maybe focus on when he was mean to people or when he was yelling at people. But he also was probably praising people and just, very supportive. And, you wonder, what do you want in a leadership in a corporation? Do you want a leader who is just always statesman-like and quiet and reserved? Or do you want a passionate leader? And, if you're going to be around somebody who's passionate, look, when you make a mistake and you don't give it your all and you're hurting the team, he's going to take it out on you. And when you're helping the team and score big victories, he's going to be effusive in his praise. And I think a lot of people, they're afraid of that kind of passion. And they just want a nice, comfortable life, and they want everything to be steady. And, so it's easy to sort of attack Steve Jobs and say, oh, he was mean, or he was inappropriately tough with his employees. But, I think the proof is in the pudding. Look at how many people stayed close to him at the company, who stuck around and who, really believed in him. And I think that's because he gave them an opportunity to be part of something great. And, and so I think, this video sort of confirms that this isn't a guy who was aloof and apart from his employees. He was fully engaged in, partaking in the fun. And remember, in the mid-1980s, Apple was a massive corporation already. And here he is, a CEO or a senior executive or the biggest shareholder, and he's taking part in these sort of parody videos. So I think it's very cool, and just shows you what a cool guy Steve Jobs was. Now, what's interesting? We heard a while ago that Apple was doing very well with the iPhone in Japan, but now more statistics have come out about that. And Engadget has some nice charts that show that the iPhone was Japan's best-selling smartphone in 2011. And, Android did well too. And this is huge if you think about it, because, there's great technology in Japan. And Japan has been a leader in technology, and yet here we have Apple from California doing well. And what's also good about this is that Steve Jobs was a big fan of Japan. And it says here in the Engadget story, it's deemed likely that Apple had the top-selling cell phone in Japan this past fall, but how did it do in all of 2012? The article says quite well if you go by MMRI's estimates. So, it shows that this is a global phenomenon with the iPhone and the iPad and the other iOS devices, and it's really doing well in Asia. We know it's doing well in China. But, the fact that it's winning in Japan is pretty remarkable, given how sophisticated Japan is with technology and how there are great technology companies there. So it really kudos to Apple. Now, there's also signs that Apple is getting ready to seriously upgrade the Mac line to Retina display. And Retina display is just the incredible pixel concentration that you have per square inch. And now word comes that the latest, upgrade to Lion, which came out recently, OS X 10.74, has hiding in it some changes that, according to PC World, says might be minor at first glance, but could indicate that Apple's about to launch something major. And they're reporting on something that Apple Insider found, which is that the built-in text editor application's icon has a higher quality version that is 1024 by 1024 pixels, double that of the previous 512 by 512 pixels in the icon before the update. So everyone thinks then that what's going on is that there's going to be Retina display Macintoshes. And they're saying that the file size of the icon for, text editor grew from 206 kilobytes in version 10.7.3 to 1.7 megabytes in 10.74. So they go on to say that this could mean that Apple's new MacBook lineup, which is expected to arrive within weeks, will feature Retina displays like the one found in the new iPad. And the article points out that Apple has described Retina display as meaning the pixels that are, quote, so close together your eyes can't discern individual ones at a normal viewing distance, end quote. So I don't know. I do think that they're going to go that route just because Apple's all about quality, and the Retina display in the iPad and iPhone is certainly about quality. And I think we're going to just see like really high definition, higher concentration pixels. Now, query what's going to be the Retina display for the 27-inch iMac. Already the 27-inch iMac, which I have, has tremendous pixel concentration. Let's take a look here at the display. And if you can see here, I've got the display. It goes up to 2,560 times 1440. So if you double that on the 27-inch iMac, I mean, you're going to have a display that's over 5,000 by like 2,900. So that's going to be an incredibly beautiful display. So I wonder if Apple can do that. I mean, it's going to take a lot of processor power, and these displays, I guess, it could become very expensive. But hidden in the latest Lion update are hints that Apple is going to this higher concentration of pixels, which, what that means is it's getting closer to reality, because reality is that there's in real life, there's just zillions of intense pixel concentrations. That's what life is. And a computer's trying to sort of recreate the visual world that we live in. So, there's been a number of stories that Apple is going to launch a 7-inch iPad in the fall, but over at Forbes magazine, they make a very good point, which is that, quote, this is the name of the article, Apple doesn't need to enter the smaller tablet market. And basically the gist of the article is that Apple doesn't really face significant competition from the Kindle Fire, which is like a 7-inch tablet, or the Android devices. It points out that according to IDC, which is, I guess, a survey of technology company, Amazon shipped only 750,000 Kindle Fires during quarter one, a sharp fall from the 4.8 million shipped during quarter four of 2011. It says the Kindle Fire was, however, not the only tablet to be affected by the seasonal slowdown, as overall Google's Android-based tablet shipments declined steeply, causing worldwide tablet shipments to come in lower than IDC projected for the quarter. So, the point that Forbes is making is that Apple really is not facing a significant competition, and they basically think that Apple also risks cutting into its margins by coming out with a cheaper iPad. It points out that the iPad's gross margins are already on the lower end at about 30% compared to the company-wide average of 45%. And they have a chart showing the drag on the trend line for the iPad gross margin profits. I guess, because they are discounting the iPad too. The article says, moreover, when we think that a cheaper 7-inch tablet appeals to a different segment of the population, that includes a mostly price-conscious consumer. So they're basically saying that cheap people want the 7-inch tablet. So I think I kind of agree with them. It says Apple has also historically avoided playing the volume game, preferring instead to have a niche market following while cornering most of the industry profits. Even in the mobile phone business, where its iPhones are selling like hotcakes, its global market share is in single digits. So, look, I think Apple's biggest challenge is going to be having significant margins, in profits when it makes a 7-inch iPad. Now, some people have speculated the price is going to be between $200 and $300. But here's the problem. The iPod Touch, which is the same size as the iPhone, starts off at $200. So what are you going to do? Price this smaller tablet device, which is the iPod Touch, and which is 3.5 inches diameter screen? Are you going to price that the same as a 7-inch iPad? I mean, I think what Apple could do is price the 7-inch iPad at $280. Will it sell at that price? I guess it would. A brand new iPad third generation is $500. A not so brand new iPad 2 is $400. So maybe you could get away with $280 as an entry level 7-inch iPad. So I don't know. I think it would be great if Apple could come out with such a thing and keep the price down and have a margin of 35 or 40%. That's the real goal. That's what's really hard. Now here's a rather sad story, one that affects the iPad and I guess the iPod Touch and our servicemen overseas, and that is, according to website Fast Company, the United States Postal Service to stop delivering iPads and Kindles to troops and overseas consumers on May 16th. And it says here that the Postal Service has banned all international shipments of electronics with lithium batteries effective May 16th. It says the cost for families to send gadgets via private parcel to enlisted loved ones in some countries could almost quadruple. And it says that this is because of United States Postal Service regulations. It'll prohibit iPads, Kindles, and smartphones and other electronics with lithium batteries from being mailed to overseas troops or foreign customers. It says that they're going to have to use private parcel services that pay a lot of, cost a lot more, like UPS, DHL, and FedEx. And I guess the reason is that lithium batteries can explode or catch fire in certain conditions. And in order to get around this, consumer electronic manufacturers such as Apple or Amazon ship their products with minimal charge, which mitigates the safety risk. So in other words, they have very little charges when they ship them. It says here, fully charged, improperly stored, and improperly packed lithium batteries do pose a risk of explosion. And it says here, lithium batteries have been implicated in at least 2 fatal cargo plane crashes since 2006, including a UPS jet in Dubai. I didn't realize that they're so dangerous. It says that for cargo shippers and postal services, this poses a quandary. Improperly shipped lithium batteries are a serious safety risk. However, shipping of personal electronics is a multi-billion-dollar business annually. Wow, I did not know this. So, I mean, this is kind of a bummer for a lot of servicemen. It's going to cost a lot of money to ship overseas. It's saying here that the United States Postal Service tells customers they anticipate, quote, on January 1, 2013, customers will be able to mail specific quantities of lithium batteries internationally when the batteries are properly installed in the personal electronic devices that are intended to operate. So, I wish they could solve this somehow. Maybe there's some way to certify that you've drained the battery. Maybe that would be the way to do it. It says, the conclusion says, in the end, the United States Postal Service rush to ban lithium batteries is surprising, although the Postal Service claims they are just getting in line with international regulations. The Bundepost and Royal Mail either successfully straggled getting in line with overly cautious and ambiguous safety regulations or found loopholes to get around them. And it says the United States Postal Service has legendary financial difficulties and a track record of institutional paralysis and poor decision making. So, I don't know, maybe they're overreacting, but it's certainly going to be a bummer for anybody who, wants to receive an iPhone or an iPod Touch or an iPad from their relatives in the United States. Now, things are getting kind of aggressive and ugly in the lawsuit in California between Apple and Samsung. And according to CNET.com, Apple now is accusing Samsung of destroying evidence in their patent infringement case. They're accusing them of spoliation of evidence. So basically, like when you're in a lawsuit, when companies are in a lawsuit with each other, they have to preserve old documents, which include emails, because of something known as discovery. And discovery means in a civil litigation, either side can send discovery requests that say produce all emails relevant to a particular issue or old documents relative to a particular issue. And so once you're heading to litigation, and once you're in litigation, you have to make sure, if you're a company, that you have preserved all your emails and all your documents, because they could be responsive in discovery, and you're on notice that there's a litigation. And so if you don't produce them or you destroy them, you can get in big trouble. And here, apparently, Apple is asking the court to have the finder of fact, I guess the jury or the judge, draw an inference from the fact that Samsung destroyed the documents. So Apple's basically saying they want to be able to tell the jury or the judge that they should draw an inference that Samsung has damning documents, because why else would they destroy them or allow them to be destroyed? So this is, high stakes litigation. There had been reports that Apple had been engaged in settlement talks with Samsung, and to some extent, that makes sense. Samsung is one of the biggest suppliers of flash memory and other components for the iPhone and the iPad and even the MacBook Air, I think, and the MacBook. And so, on one hand, Samsung is an ally of Apple. On the other hand, Apple believes that Samsung is the biggest infringer of the iPhone and the iPad's copywritten design and patents. So it's a very complex relationship between these two large corporations. And, how would you structure a settlement? Because Apple wants Samsung to agree to stop making devices that rip off the look and feel of the iPhone and the iPad. Now, there were reports that, some of the more recent phones that have come up by Samsung are designed to look a little different than the iPhone and the iPad. So it could be that Samsung's already getting into some sort of settlement mode where they want to demonstrate to Apple that they'll make their devices look significantly different. So, it's an interesting development, but meanwhile, the heat's still on in the litigations. I think that there will be some sort of global settlement, because it's just very distracting for both companies to have so many litigations in so many countries where they're beating each other up. And so I think at some point they'll reach common ground, and we'll see. So one of the most striking photos I've seen came via TechCrunch, which had a great story today entitled, "This is what developing for Android looks like." Now, what does this have to do with an Apple podcast? It has to do something because, Android is the biggest competitor in the iOS world for Apple, right? I mean, you've got Android smartphones and Android tablets, and, for those who like Apple, you have to point out why Apple's iPhone or tablet, iPad, is better. And here's a striking reason. So apparently, the big problem in the Android world is there's so many different hardware devices with different specs, and then the operating system is so different, and people install it at different stages, and they don't update it as quickly as they do on the iPhone, so everything's very different. So TechCrunch has this picture, and I have a video shot of it. Apparently there's an Android developer called Animoca, which is based in Hong Kong, and their apps have more than 70 million downloads. But to test their apps so that they work, to make sure that they work well, they test them on 400 Android devices. So they have a picture of a huge conference room table with hundreds and hundreds of Android devices, and basically these devices are just all over the place, and so they have to test them on all sorts of devices. So think if you were a developer, a small developer, how challenging it would be to develop for Android, because you would have to buy dozens and dozens of different devices if you wanted to test to make sure that your app worked. And that's a big problem in the Android world, because anybody can create hardware, and Google wasn't good at demanding as part of the licensing of Android that developers stick to certain hardware specifications. Now, Apple doesn't have that problem because Apple's the only one making the hardware for iOS. And, and to some degree, Apple, in developing the Mac, made that argument with Microsoft and Windows, because Microsoft made the operating system and licensed it to hardware manufacturers for the PC. But Microsoft was much more disciplined than Google in dictating specification to the hardware manufacturers and saying, listen, if you want to license Windows, you have to have these minimum specs so that there's compatibility across the Windows line. But Google did not do that. And so it becomes quite daunting for a developer, for the Android platform, who wants to ensure that the programs run on all devices. Now, the article basically says it's going to get even worse, because there's a lot of low-end, low-price hardware manufacturers for Android in Asia cranking out all sorts of Android devices that are very maybe low-powered or not designed to spec. And so the ecosystem for Android is just all over the place. Which sort of begs the question, will Google, now that it's acquiring Motorola, will it make its own hardware directly by owning Motorola? And if that happens, then you might see even more fragmentation, because companies like Samsung are going to see Google as a competitive threat, and maybe they'll fork the operating system to make it more different than the Android operating system that Google is releasing. Now, there's been a lot of speculation as to what the next iPhone will look like. The one that's probably going to come out in October of 2012. There's been some speculation that it's going to have a much bigger screen, that it's going to have a big metal back, maybe liquid metal, and a lot thinner. And there's an article out from iMore by Renee Ritchie, who basically says that the iPhone 5 design has still not been finalized, and there's still no big screen and still no metal back. So he's sort of suggesting that there isn't going to be that drastic a change. And I think if you look historically Apple, doesn't make radical changes in the iPhone because it's so successful. So in the past, there's been huge speculation of massive change in some release for the iPhone, and in the end, it comes out, and there is some change, but it isn't like a massive change. So, one of the things that people are saying is that the USB dock is going to be smaller and more consistent with what other hardware manufacturers make with the micro SIM or the micro USB port. I think Apple's not going to screw around with the USB port because there's so many third-party hardware devices that use that dock and work with that dock. And a lot of people have invested in all sorts of accessories for the iPhone that work with that dock. So I don't think Apple's going to monkey around with that right now. I do think that Apple is going to come out with a slightly bigger screen because we are seeing much bigger screens on the Android devices, but they're going to do it in a way that isn't a massive, phone. They're probably going to just chip away at the sort of space that's between the screen and the side and the top of the iPhone. They're probably going to have LTE cell phone data capabilities in the iPhone, which may be that the iPhone doesn't get significantly thinner. It might actually get a little bulkier, because if you look with the iPad, Apple was not able to make the third generation iPad lighter than the second generation iPad, in part because they needed the battery to take care of the higher energy consuming LTE chip. So I don't think you're going to see a much lighter iPhone. I think they're going to need as much space in the iPhone to pack in battery as possible, particularly if they go to an LTE chip. So, I'm sure we're going to see or hear more rumors as we get closer to the launch. Now, one of the most successful establishments in retailing for kids is a retail chain called GameStop, where you can rent PlayStation and Xbox games. And to give you a sense of how successful Apple has become in the gaming world, apparently, or how successful Apple has become with kids, apparently Apple Insider has a story that says that GameStop may start selling used Apple MacBooks. And they have a screenshot. It looks like an inventory screenshot of used MacBooks in the internal system. It says here, an anonymous GameStop employee provided Kotaku, I guess that's a website, with a screenshot of the company's inventory screen. It shows 3 MacBook models listed among used Xbox 360 hard drives, HDMI cables, and PlayStation portable carrying case. And it says a second screenshot shows a more extensive list of MacBooks, complete with prices well below retail. So, there may be a really interesting market that GameStop is trying to capture of used MacBooks, even, older MacBooks that sell as low as $460 or a used 11-inch MacBook Air. So, I think it makes sense. Kids are obviously into GameStop, and kids are obviously into Macs, and if there's a way to make a buck, maybe GameStop feels that selling recycled Macs is a good way. Okay, so one of the coolest apps I've seen come out for the Mac, which is right now 60% off and costs $8 or $7.99, is something called Timing. And it's I've never seen an app like this, but it's very clever. Timing basically is an app that keeps track of what you're doing on your Mac, like how much time you're spending every day doing certain things on your Mac. And so, basically it supports applications like Safari, Chrome, Opera, Mail, Preview, Photoshop, Acorn, iWork, Microsoft Office, the list goes on. And it basically can keep track of what you're doing. And it's recently been upgraded to version 1.2.1, which allows you to add in manually custom activities that are not on the computer. So if you're doing other stuff, so in a way, it's a great way to keep track of your hours for billing. It says here, added an option to the menu item to automatically ask you to manually create activities after having been idle line only. So if you walk away from your computer and you do something else. So it's a very, I think this is very clever, because if you're billing for doing all sorts of like work, it might be helpful to show you, what you've done. It might be proof of what you've done. Like if you say that you're on, coding in, Xcode, maybe this keeps track of your coding in Xwork to show that you work for certain hours. So let's see what the reviews are like. Well, one person gave it 1 star recently, says, I had this installed on my MacBook Pro and had to remove it due to complications with starting and stopping the machine. I thought I would give this version a shot on my new iMac, but on the first restart after installing it, I was faced with a blank white screen. So they're saying it's kind of buggy, but on the other hand, some people are saying that it is good. Somebody writes, not only does it gives it 4 stars. Not only does timing give insight into where the time syncs on my life, it also lets me record offline activities for a more complete picture. This app's paid for itself many times over the first day by identifying work that needed to be billed to the client. So it's a very clever app. You can download a free version that will, I guess, only timing light free time tracker. And so this only keeps your time, I guess, for like a day or two, and not for a week. So, if you just want to test it out, they have 2 versions in the Mac App Store, a free version and a paid version. So kudos to them. Now, Apple may be seeking to acquire assistance in building its future Apple TV. Apple Insider has a story out on May 12th that Apple is in talks to acquire a German high-definition television maker named Loewe, L-O-E-W-E. And it says that, Apple is offering something like $112 million, which is a slight premium over this, I guess, European firm's last closing share price in euros. So basically, it said here that Lowe's primary shareholder is currently Sharp and LaCie. So other big tech companies own a piece of this company. So this company has a presence selling, I guess, some high-definition televisions. It says Lowe's, which entered the TV market in 1929, now employs around 1,000 workers around the world in 50 countries. And I guess it makes some sort of minimalist TVs. So maybe they're looking for the technology and maybe the patents that Lowe's has. Maybe what's going on is maybe Apple is afraid once it comes out with the Apple TV that it might be sued for patent violations. And if this company, Lowe's, has been making the TV since 1929, then it must have a lot of patents worldwide on televisions. So I wouldn't be surprised if Apple buys this company just to get patents, and $112 million is kind of cheap if you want a vibrant patent portfolio. So, or maybe it wants the technology and the people who make these high definition televisions at Lowe's. So it's not a huge company, and this does make sense. Apple Insider claims they have a source that says Apple is doing this, and it does make sense. Apple usually makes small acquisitions, and $112 million would be a small acquisition. Okay, so that's it. This for episode 114 of the Apple Podcast. This is Lex at Max Future. Thanks for listening, and you can give this podcast support in the iTunes Store by giving it a positive review or on YouTube. So see you next time.
This has been a Max Future production.